The explosion was heard 12 miles away. The luxury yacht Serendipity had been sailing through the Ionian Sea, its hull gleaming like a pearl against the turquoise water, when it tore apart in a blossom of fire and black smoke that painted the sky the color of bruises. The world watched the news footage in collective shock, not because the yacht was impressive, but because the man aboard was a living monument to power. Damien Cross, the energy mogul who had built a $1 trillion empire from a single oil lease in the Permian Basin, was dead. The official identification took 48 hours, a charred fragment of jawbone, a dental record that matched, a wedding band melted into the shape of a tear. The funeral was scheduled for the following Saturday. 500 of the most powerful people on Earth would gather in the Cross family mausoleum, a marble colossus that dwarfed the surrounding trees, to pay their respects to a man who had terrified them all for 50 years. But here is the truth that no one knew. Damien Cross was not dead. He was standing in a tiny surveillance room beneath the mausoleum, watching a live feed of his own funeral through a series of hidden cameras. His face was hidden beneath a prosthetic mask, his body contorted into the shape of a hunched old priest he had bribed to remain silent. He had orchestrated the entire thing, the explosion, the identification, the grief, all to answer the one question that had haunted him for the last decade. Which one of his children had tried to kill him? The yacht's captain, a man who had been with Cross for 20 years, had confessed on his deathbed that a detonation device had been hidden in the engine room. He didn't know who hired him, but he knew that the order had come from someone inside the family. Cross had 3 children. The eldest, Marcus, a corporate shark who had been groomed to take over. The middle daughter, Isabella, a philanthropist with a nuclear waste disposal empire. And the youngest, Daniel, a prodigal son who had been exiled to a small vineyard in Tuscany after a scandal that nearly destroyed the company. One of them wanted him dead. Cross had faked his own death to catch them in the act, and as he watched the mourners file into the mausoleum, he felt a sensation he had not experienced in years: genuine anticipation. The funeral was the trap, and the bait was the most valuable asset in the world: the illusion of vulnerability. The mausoleum was a masterpiece of morbid excess. The walls were lined with Carrara marble, each slab etched with the names of Cross ancestors who had died wealthy and unloved. The altar was a single block of obsidian, polished to a mirror finish, on which rested the urn that supposedly contained Damien Cross's ashes. The family sat in the front row, each of them a portrait of carefully calibrated grief. Marcus wore a charcoal suit that cost more than most homes, his face a mask of stoic sorrow that did not quite hide the hunger in his eyes. Isabella dabbed at her eyes with a silk handkerchief, her shoulders shaking in what appeared to be genuine anguish. Daniel, who had flown in from Italy, looked like a ghost, gaunt, hollow-eyed, his hands trembling as he clutched the pew in front of him. The disguised Cross studied them through the camera feed. He had spent his entire life reading people, discerning lies from truths, and he could see the cracks in each of their performances. Marcus's grief was too controlled, too rehearsed. Isabella's tears were too theatrical, too timed. And Daniel looked like a man who had already been destroyed by guilt. Cross made a mental note. His youngest son had always been the weakest, the most sensitive, the one most likely to be manipulated. But weakness could also be a mask. He had learned that lesson the hard way. The priest began the eulogy. It was a hollow litany of platitudes, words that had been written by Cross himself months ago. He had dictated the entire speech, ensuring that it would contain a single secret message, a code phrase that only the guilty party would recognize. The phrase was, "The lighthouse keeper." It was a reference to a story Cross had told his children when they were young, a parable about a man who protected a lighthouse, even though it meant living alone. It was his way of testing loyalty. He had told them that the lighthouse keeper was the hero, the one who sacrificed everything for the greater good, but he had also told them, in private, that the lighthouse keeper was a fool. Only the person who had hired the assassin would know that Cross had secretly despised that story. The priest spoke the phrase. "Damien was the lighthouse keeper of our family," he intoned, his voice echoing through the marble hall. "A man who stood alone, guiding others through the darkness, never asking for anything in return." Marcus stiffened, just slightly, a micro-movement that Cross's trained eye caught immediately. Isabella's handkerchief froze mid-dab. Daniel, however, looked confused. He did not react to the code phrase at all. That meant one of two things. Either Daniel was innocent, or he was an even better actor than Cross had given him credit for. The service continued. The mourners filed past the urn, each offering a silent prayer or a whispered word. Cross watched them all, his mind cataloging every gesture, every glance, every nervous tick. But it was not until the very end, when the last guest had left and the family was alone in the mausoleum, that the truth began to reveal itself. Marcus turned to his siblings, his face suddenly sharp and cold. "The old man is dead, finally. We don't have to pretend anymore." Isabella's eyes widened. "Marcus, how dare you?" "Save it. We all hated him. He was a monster. He destroyed our mother. He ruined your charity, Daniel. He threatened to cut me out of the will because I wouldn't marry that whore he picked out for me. The only question is which one of us actually had the guts to pull the trigger." Daniel's face went pale. "I didn't do it. I didn't kill him." Marcus laughed. "Of course you did. You were always the weakest. You couldn't stand up to him. You couldn't fight him. So you hired someone to do it for you." Cross watched this exchange with growing fury. His children were tearing each other apart, exactly as he had hoped, but also exactly as he had feared. Because in their accusations, he could see the truth. None of them had killed him. They were all suspects, yes, but they were also all innocent, which meant the killer was someone else entirely. Someone who had been standing in the mausoleum the entire time, watching the family implode with quiet satisfaction. Cross's gaze shifted to the corner of the surveillance feed. There, standing in the shadows, was the family lawyer, a man named Percival Hollis. Hollis had been Cross's confidant for 30 years. He knew every secret, every sin, every hidden account, and he was smiling. A small, private smile that was not visible to the mourners, but was unmistakable on the high-definition camera. Cross felt his blood run cold. The funeral ended. The family dispersed. Cross remained in his surveillance room, his mind racing through the implications. Percival Hollis had been with him since the beginning. He had helped Cross build the empire. He had known about every deal, every bribe, every ruined rival. He had also known about Cross's plan to fake his own death. He had been the one to suggest the yacht, the captain, the false identification. Cross had trusted him implicitly. That trust had been a mistake. Cross emerged from the mausoleum basement hours after everyone had left. He had shed the priest costume, replacing it with a simple black suit and a wide-brimmed hat that obscured his face. He walked through the cemetery, past the weeping angels and the marble obelisks, his heart pounding with a fury he had not felt in decades. He found Hollis in his office, a penthouse suite overlooking the city that Cross himself had built. The lawyer was sitting behind his desk, a glass of whiskey in his hand, his feet propped up on a leather ottoman. He did not look surprised to see Cross. He looked amused. "Damien," he said, raising his glass in a mock toast, "I was wondering when you would come crawling out of your little hole." Cross closed the door behind him. His voice was a low growl. "You tried to kill me." Hollis laughed. "Tried? I succeeded. You are dead, Damien. The world believes it. Your children believe it. The only person who knows otherwise is me, and I have no intention of letting you walk out of this room alive." He pressed a button under his desk. The lights flickered. The windows darkened. The room was sealed. Cross looked around, his mind calculating the situation. He was trapped, but he was not defenseless. He had been preparing for this moment his entire life. "I trusted you," Cross said. "I made you a billionaire. I gave you everything." Hollis set down his glass, his face twisted into a mask of hatred. "I gave me nothing. You kept me on a leash. You made me your dog. You humiliated me in front of clients. You laughed at me behind my back. And you promised me a seat on the board, a seat I never got because you thought I was too ambitious. Do you know what it's like to wait 30 years for a promise that will never be kept? Do you know what it's like to watch a man like you destroy everyone around you and then claim that you're the victim?" Cross did not answer. He was already moving, his hand sliding into his jacket, his fingers closing around the cold steel of a pistol he had hidden there. But Hollis was faster. He drew a weapon from his desk drawer and fired. The bullet grazed Cross's shoulder, tearing through the fabric of his suit and embedding itself in the wall behind him. Cross stumbled, his hand clutching the wound. His blood dripped onto the pristine white carpet. "I should have killed you myself years ago," Hollis snarled, "but I wanted it to be poetic. I wanted you to watch your family destroy itself. I wanted you to see how much they hated you. And now, here you are, the great Damien Cross, bleeding on the floor of a room that used to be yours." Cross looked up at his betrayer, and he smiled. It was a cold, terrifying smile, the smile of a man who had been playing the game longer than anyone had realized. "You're right," Cross said. "I should have seen this coming, but you made one mistake, Percival. You forgot that I am always 3 steps ahead." He pressed a button on his watch. The room filled with the sound of sirens, police, dozens of them. They burst through the door, their weapons drawn, their faces grim. Hollis's eyes went wide. He raised his hands, the gun still smoking, but it was too late. He was trapped. Cross rose slowly, his wound bleeding profusely, his voice steady. "I knew you were the one," he said. "I knew it the moment you suggested the yacht. I had the captain's confession. I had the bank records. I had everything I needed to destroy you. But I wanted you to admit it, and you just did." Hollis screamed in rage as the police tackled him to the ground. He struggled, his eyes fixed on Cross, his face contorted with fury. But it was futile. His plan was over. Cross had won. The revenge was supposed to be complete. But the story does not end there. Because the twist, the real twist, was still unfolding. As Hollis was being dragged away in handcuffs, Cross collapsed to the floor. His wound was more severe than he had realized. The blood was flowing faster now, pooling beneath his body, turning the white carpet into a crimson stain. He had miscalculated. He had underestimated his own vulnerability. He was dying. The police officers crowded around him, shouting for an ambulance. Cross looked up at the ceiling, his vision blurring. And in that moment, he saw a face. It was his youngest son, Daniel. Daniel had followed him. He had been watching from the hallway, and now he was standing over his father, his expression unreadable. "Daniel," Cross whispered, "help me." Daniel knelt beside him. His face was close, so close that Cross could see the tears in his eyes. And then he spoke. "I know you faked your death, Father. I followed you. I've been following you since the funeral, because I needed to know the truth." Cross struggled to speak. The truth. Daniel leaned closer. His voice was barely a whisper. "I killed you, Father. I hired the assassin. I paid the captain. I did it." Cross's eyes went wide. His blood ran cold. "You?" Daniel nodded. Tears were streaming down his face, but his voice was steady. "You destroyed me, Father. You took everything from me. My mother, my dignity, my future. You exiled me to that vineyard because I was weak. But you were wrong. I was never weak. I was patient. I waited. I planned. And when I heard about Hollis's plan, I used it. I made him believe it was his idea. I fed him the information. I controlled him from the shadows. The assassination was mine. The funeral was mine. This moment, right now, is mine." Cross tried to reach for his gun, but he was too weak. His arms wouldn't move. Daniel placed a hand on his father's chest and pressed down gently. "You always said I was weak," he whispered. "But look at you now, lying in a pool of your own blood, dying alone, with nothing. You don't get to have revenge, Father. You don't get to win, because I already won. I won the moment you faked your death. I won the moment you walked into that trap. I won the moment you trusted Hollis over me." Cross's vision faded. His heart slowed. His last breath was a single, ragged sigh. Daniel stood up. He looked at the police officers who were staring at him in shock, and he smiled. "My father is dead. He was murdered by his lawyer. Percival Hollis confessed. We all heard it. I have no idea what you're talking about." The officers looked at each other. They had heard Hollis's confession. They had seen Cross's wound. They had no reason to doubt Daniel. The case was closed. The billionaire was dead. The killer was in custody. And the true mastermind, the son who had outsmarted them all, walked away into the night. The revenge was never Cross's. It was Daniel's. And it was perfect. The aftermath of Damien Cross's real death was a media frenzy. The world had mourned him once, and now it mourned him again, this time with the added tragedy of his murder by a trusted confidant. Percival Hollis was tried, convicted, and sentenced to life in prison without parole. He spent his final years in a cell, screaming about a conspiracy that no one believed. The family attended a second funeral, this one with an actual body, though it was badly burned from the mausoleum's surveillance room that had been rigged to explode by Daniel. Marcus and Isabella fought bitterly over the will, each claiming that Cross had promised them the empire. But the will was missing. The only copy had been destroyed in the explosion, and the lawyer who had hidden it was dead. The empire fell into chaos. Shareholders panicked, competitors swooped in like vultures. Within a year, Cross Energy was a shadow of its former self. Daniel watched it all from his vineyard in Tuscany. He had no interest in the empire. He had never wanted it. He had only wanted revenge. And now that he had it, he felt nothing but emptiness. He spent his days tending to the grapes, his nights drinking the wine he had made. The money from the vineyard was modest, but it was his. He had built it himself, he had earned it, and he had done it without his father's blood money. Marcus and Isabella, on the other hand, were ruined. They had spent everything they had on lawyers, on investigators, on a futile attempt to reclaim the fortune that had slipped through their fingers. Marcus declared bankruptcy. Isabella's charity was a front for money laundering. They were both disgraced. They never spoke to Daniel again. They blamed him, of course. They blamed him for the missing will, for the explosion, for everything. But they had no proof, and Daniel had no intention of confessing. He had already won. 10 years later, Daniel received an unexpected visitor. It was a woman he had never seen before, dressed in a simple black dress, her face hidden behind a veil. She sat across from him at his vineyard table and poured herself a glass of his wine. "You don't know who I am," she said. Daniel shook his head. "I don't." She lifted her veil, and Daniel's heart stopped. It was his mother, the woman he had been told died in childbirth, the woman his father had always claimed was weak, fragile, gone. She was alive. She was sitting at his table, and she was smiling. "I never died," she said. "Your father had me committed. He said I was insane, that I was a threat to the family. He locked me away in a facility in Switzerland. I escaped 5 years ago. I've been watching you ever since." Daniel could not speak. His mind was a whirlwind of questions, of emotions, of fury and joy and confusion. "Why didn't you come to me sooner?" he managed to whisper. "Because I needed to see what kind of man you had become," she said. "I knew about the assassination. I knew about the explosion. I knew about everything. And I was proud of you, Daniel. You did what I could never do. You destroyed him. You took everything from him, just like he took everything from me." Daniel's tears flowed freely. He had spent his entire life believing his mother was dead. He had spent his entire life hating his father for it. And now the truth was finally revealed. His mother had been alive all along. She had been the silent architect of the revenge. She had fed him information, planted the seeds, orchestrated the events. It was all her. She was the real mastermind, and Daniel was just a soldier. "You used me," Daniel said, his voice trembling. "You used me to destroy your husband." His mother leaned forward. Her eyes were cold, calculating, the same eyes he had seen in his father. "I used you because you were the only one who could do it," she said. "You were the one he underestimated. You were the one he called weak. And you proved him wrong. You proved him so wrong." Daniel stood up. He walked to the edge of the vineyard, staring out at the endless rows of grapes. His mind was a storm. He had believed he was the mastermind. He had believed he was the one in control. And now he had learned that he was just a piece on a board, a piece that had been moved by a ghost. But here is the final twist. Daniel was not finished. He turned to his mother, his face hardening into a mask of stone. "You used me," Daniel repeated, "but I am not your pawn. I am my father's son, and that means I am a monster. He pulled a pistol from his pocket, the same pistol he had used to kill his father, though he had never admitted it to anyone. He aimed it at his mother, and he fired. She fell to the ground, her eyes wide with shock and betrayal. Daniel watched her die, and then he walked away. The revenge, in the end, was not against his father. It was against everyone who had ever tried to control him. He would not be a pawn. He would not be a weapon. He would not be a piece on a board. He would be the board itself, and he would destroy anyone who tried to move him again. The vineyard was silent. The grapes swayed in the breeze, and Daniel Cross, the man who had outsmarted his father and his mother, disappeared into the shadows, never to be seen again. The story of Damien Cross became a legend, a cautionary tale about the cost of power, the price of revenge, and the poison of family loyalty. But no one knew the full truth. No one knew about the mother who had orchestrated the assassination. No one knew about the son who had killed both his parents. No one knew about the lawyer who had been framed, the siblings who had been destroyed, the empire that had crumbled into dust. The only person who knew everything was Daniel, and Daniel was gone. He had taken his father's fortune, hidden it in accounts that no one could trace, and disappeared into the world. He lived under a dozen different names, in a dozen different countries. He never married, he never had children, he never trusted anyone again, because he had learned the ultimate lesson. In a world of monsters, the only way to survive is to become the biggest monster of all, and he had done exactly that. The explosion was never the end, it was the beginning. The funeral was never the trap, it was the stage. The revenge was never the goal, it was the journey. And Daniel Cross, the prodigal son, the exile, the weakling, had walked that journey to its bitter, bloody conclusion. He had won. But winning, he discovered, was not the same as being happy. It was not the same as being free. It was simply the absence of loss, and in the end, that was all he had left. A world of ashes, a kingdom of nothing, and a heart that had long since stopped beating. The billionaire who attended his own funeral had no idea that the real funeral was his own. The revenge he sought was never his to claim, and the legacy he left behind was not one of power, but of destruction. Daniel Cross, the son who had killed his father, became the phantom of his own making. He haunted the world not as a presence, but as an absence, a void where a man should have been. And in that void he found his final revenge, the silence of a life that meant nothing, and the peace of a soul that had finally stopped fighting. The story ended where it began, in darkness, in fire, in the ashes of a family that had never really existed, and that was the cruelest twist of all.